Foiled plots, cross-border investigations, police raids, asset freezes. Europe, and in particular France, have Iranian intrigue in their crosshairs. The French accusing, among other, Tehran's deputy intelligence minister over an attempt back in June to target outside Paris the annual convention of a controversial exiled opposition group. The charge leveled the same day police raided a Shia Muslim support center in northern France. We're going to look at both, see if there's a connection. French diplomats also accusing Iran of carrying out 3 assassinations on European soil since 2015. Are we talking about a throwback to the early days of the Islamic Republic when the Shah's exiled last prime minister was murdered at his home outside Paris, or when Iran, through Lebanese proxies, was blamed for financing terror attacks like the one at a Paris department store in 1986? 1 week ago, when the French president and his Iranian counterpart met in New York on the sidelines of UN Week, it was noted that Emmanuel Macron had yet to fill the vacancy of ambassador to Tehran. That is taken as a sign of discontent. Yet, Macron has also argued against Donald Trump in favor of remaining in the 2015 nuclear deal. Where are relations headed? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at France accusing Iran. And joining us from Washington, Julian Borger, World Affairs Editor for The Guardian. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Her new book out in French today, journalist Sophia Marat, author of Baghdadi, the Caliph of Terror. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening.
Spoiler alert here, you're saying he's alive.
Yes, he is, in Syria.
In Syria, okay. Well, we're going to talk about how Iran's influence beyond its borders is playing out a little bit later on. Also with us, Ershad Alijani, a journalist here at France 24's Observers, our citizens' website which brings in people from around the globe, and also for sister station Radio France International. Thanks for joining us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. First came Monday's ruling by a German court greenlighting the extradition to Belgium of an Iranian diplomat. Then Tuesday's freeze on Iranian intelligence assets here in France, all over June's foiled plot. Concomitantly, that raid near Dunkirk in the north on a Shia advocacy center. Maud Julien explains.
France's tone against Iran was harsh on Tuesday. The government announced they were freezing assets belonging to the country's intelligence services and 2 Iranian nationals. The move is a retaliation for an alleged bomb plot against an Iranian opposition group on French soil.
An attempted attack in Villepinte was foiled on the 30th of June. An incident of such gravity on our national territory could not go unpunished.
Earlier on Tuesday, 200 French policemen launched what they call a terrorism prevention raid against the Zara Center in the north of the country, one of the biggest Shiite Muslim centers in France. Yahya Gouasmi, its founder, is known for his anti-Zionist views and links to Iran.
This is the headquarters of the anti-Zionist party. You can see here we have the flag of Israel and you have to wipe your feet on it before you enter.
Israel.
This is why they think we are against Israel more so than other people are.
Authorities said the center's leaders support several terrorist organizations. 11 people were arrested, including for the possession of firearms. The hardening of relations between France and Tehran could have major diplomatic repercussions at a time when France is trying to keep Iran in the 2015 accord to limit its nuclear program.
Let's go through what's happened so far this week, and it's early days. We're only Wednesday. Ershad Alijani, first of all, is there a link between those two stories, between the French freezing those assets over that foiled plot, or that alleged foiled plot, and that raid we saw early in the morning near the Belgian border yesterday?
Officially, no. We don't know. There is a relation between 2 accidents. Arrests of 2 people who have been the freezed assets of Iranian intelligence ministry, and attack to Zahra Center Officially, we don't know. We have some reports in Le Monde who deny that there isn't any connection between them. But other French media suggest that there is connection between two stories. But at the end, we can consider that France took the foil bombing plot seriously and tried to push some pressure or show some powerful image of himself who is ready to protect his soil against any kind of these terrorist attacks.
So the raid in northern France is a way for French authorities to send a calling card, send a message to Tehran?
That's the image, I think.
Sophia Mara?
Definitely. There is no proof till now that the two stories are linked. What is really clear is that it's a way for Paris, which has been almost the last ally of Tehran in the nuclear deal. And they're losing it. I mean, Tehran might lose this ally and don't want to lose this ally. And I think that France also is trying to keep, any kind of contact, even though there is no ambassador, even though it's sending a clear message through through the last action that have been taken the last 48 hours. It is a message because France, I think, is aware that it's very dangerous to corner Iran. Even more dangerous than what it could do on the soil if nothing was done. So it's trying to keep at least a small, teeny link to get, to try to...
So applying pressure, keeping the back channels open.
Yes.
At the same time, let's talk about what happened on June the 30th. It's an annual convention in Villepinte of the People's Mujahideen. They go by several different names.
A yearly one.
And a yearly one. This year they had Rudy Giuliani there, the Trump's lawyer.
It would have been a massacre if should have the plot succeeded.
What do you make of this plot?
I really I think that, Mujahideen Khalq have been active here since years. And nothing happened for years, fortunately. I think this year, this was planned because Iran, on an internal level, has a really big problem, economical problem. The protests are growing bigger. So I think, Iran is a two-headed state. It's dual, it's bicéphale almost. So I think that it could be, we have no proof, of course, it could be the Guardians of the Revolution, the Al-Quds force, meaning the Jerusalem force, that had led this action against them because the Americans more and more...
To undermine the president, to undermine Hassan Rouhani?
Not only. It's not the main aim. The main aim is to tell them, since they're being more and more backed by the U.S., and it is said that they are backed by Riyadh, KSA, the Saudis.
And we should not forget that Iran has a record of this kind of acts.
Yeah, but
in
it's
Germany,
not the only
in some
proof.
Other countries.
But it's this year. Why this year? I mean, Mujahideen Khalq have been there for decades. Why now? Because there is a protest. Protests are going bigger in Iran, and it's a way to say, do you think it's an alternative? We're going to show you. And it could have been a massacre there. Should it have succeeded?
On the hashtag F24 debate, reaction from Leandra. What motives would Iran have to bomb France, especially when they're already dealing with sanctions and international pressures because the U.S. wants regime change? Makes no sense and came out of nowhere. Julian Borger, our correspondent in Tehran, telling us that the Iranian authorities say there's a further reason to deny it. Hassan Rouhani was on the eve of a trip to Europe, and there's no way that something like that could have been triggered out of Tehran at that particular point in time. Do you agree?
Well, not if the government in Tehran is splintering under the pressure of the U.S. sanctions, under the pressure of opposition organizations operating within Iran, backed by Israel, by Gulf countries. There is a lot of pressure on the government, and there are parts of the regime in Tehran that want to hit back. that would like to leave the JCPOA, and if not, at least show that that Iran is not going to be passive in the face of this kind of this effort, this campaign originated in Washington, but also from Israel and the Gulf monarchies to basically to change the regime in Iran. So I think, if this does turn out to be the Ministry of Intelligence, Iranian intelligence behind this bomb plot, a reckless bomb plot on French soil at a time when France is steadfast in its defense of the JCPOA, if the Ministry of Intelligence was behind that, then it shows that things are beginning to fall apart in Tehran.
Let's listen to the official reaction from Iran. It came, at a low level on Tuesday. A foreign ministry spokesperson calling for dialogue with Paris to clear up the misunderstanding.
When there is nothing, or when it's wrong, you can't accuse the intelligence ministry or anyone else working there to be involved in an unconfirmed thing.
Julian Borgia, we're talking about an investigation which is being shepherded by Belgium that involves an Iranian diplomat based in Austria, but who was arrested in Germany. We've also had 2 diplomats from Iran expelled from the Netherlands in July. So this has really gone across Europe. There's a lot of fingerprints, it seems, with this couple that was picked up at the time in Belgium. Some sources wondering, is this really the modus operandi of Iranian intelligence services?
Well, they do have a record of being somewhat haphazard on occasions. There was a bizarre plot, an apparent plot some years ago in Washington to blow up a Washington restaurant that involved someone from Mexico who had mental problems, and the U.S. authorities were adamant that it was Iranian intelligence behind this plot. And if that was true, it was haphazard, it was reckless. So there are parallels there, but everything depends on the truth of the matter. Is this Iranian intelligence behind it, or is it a false flag? And if it is Iranian intelligence, what is the aim? These seem such reckless plots, if confirmed, that it seems logical to interpret them as a way of provoking conflict.
Well, the French authorities aren't telling us everything at this point in time, but they seem pretty certain of what they've got, Julian, what with the freezing of assets for the intelligence services here, and naming those 2 men, Asadullah Assadi and Saeed Hashemi Moghadam, who is the deputy minister at the intelligence ministry. So
all the more surprising if it is Tehran, Iranian intelligence behind this. You really have to look at what the motivation is here, because it is such a blatant, such a reckless act if carried out. As your other guest has said, it would have been a massacre. Tightly packed hall full not only of MEK supporters, but also foreigners who'd been bussed in there to make up the numbers, to pad out the crowd. So it would have been a major European incident, and it is or would have been a possible trigger for a conflict.
Sorry, I think there is a point that we should not forget here, that when we are talking about Iran, we are not talking about a solid, homogeneous country structure of power. Even if Foreign Ministry of Iran deny something that they have not done, there is another part that they can't talk behalf of them, and that's the IRGC, Revolutionary Guard Corps. And they have the records of this kind of, I can call it stupid, trying to bombing somewhere. We had 3...
so sometimes they're good, sometimes they're careless.
Foil bombing plot in Kenya, India, and Thailand 2012. And that was exactly the same story. And we should consider that if even Foreign Minister of Iran denies, they can talk behalf of other side of power that they don't control.
Yes, I mean, it's not the only reason. That's totally true. But, you know, no killer would go and say, yes, I recognize it's me. Nobody's going to say this. It's just about they're denying. That doesn't mean they didn't do it. But I totally agree with you that this country is a dual country. You have the Faylaq al-Quds or the Al-Quds Force or the Guardians of the Revolution who could carry an attack without the green light of the head of state and without maybe even the head of state knowing about it and doing it not in a professional way. I have interviewed not long ago Anis al-Naqash, who was who tried to kill, who did an attack in France, and he came and he organized everything with the Iranians, and he discovered that his goal had a door that was complete. He couldn't enter. Well, I mean, this is really kids' work. And he was caught, and he killed a policeman, but he didn't kill his target, you know? And, of course, the Iranians denied, but they were behind the thing, and he told me.
And it hits a raw nerve here in France because there were the bad old days, the early days of the Iranian Revolution,
yes.
When there were a string of attacks.
Yes, because Tehran accused Paris to back Saddam Hussein's Iraq against the young revolution in Iran.
Yeah,
and
also,
it was in the 80s. It was a bloody decade.
And to pressure for the liberation of men behind bars. There was the attack at the Tati department store in the Rue de Rennes.
Marbeuf, yeah, of course. And because France was accused to give planes to Saddam Hussein during the 80-88 war the bloody war between Iran and Iraq.
And the assassination of Shah Bakhtiar, the last prime minister of the Shah.
Of the Shah, definitely.
And this happened in the Paris suburb of Suresnes.
Mm-hmm, yes.
And these are just the famous ones. There are 3 or 4 attacks, unfortunately successful.
Buenos Aires.
Even in France, they have.
Have times. We're going to go to the break. When we come back, I'm going to ask Julian Borger what's changed since. The beginning of the Iranian Revolution in terms of how Iran deals with dissidents. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 today. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're talking about France pointing the finger at Iran over an alleged bomb plot in late June at the annual conference of a controversial opposition group just outside of Paris. With us to talk about it, the Guardian newspaper's World Affairs editor Julian Borger, who joins us from Washington. Welcome back as well to Sophia Amara, journalist, author of Baghdadi, the Caliph of Terror, published in French this very Wednesday here in France. Ershad Alijani, journalist at France 24's Observer's website and also at Radio France International. Just before the break, we were wondering, and Julian Borger, I'll put the question to you, over have times changed? The old days of when Iran would target dissidents and opponents, the French saying that there have been 3 assassinations carried out on European soil since 2015.
Well, it does look as though this campaign of assassinations is back on again. Those forces in Tehran, in the Quds Force, in the intelligence, that have been there all along, but seem to have been reined in recent years, especially in the years of negotiation with the US and other major powers about the Iranian deal, do seem to have been reined in by the hierarchy, by the supreme leader. And now it does look as though those restraints are coming off, and that suggests that the elements of the government, of the power structures in Tehran are rattled by what is going on, by the relentless pressure from the US, from Israel, and from the Gulf monarchies, that there is a lashing out going on here, and a sense of desperation, of being rattled. in these elements of the power structure and the intelligence and the Quds force.
Yeah, I think it's hard for this country, the structure of this country, how it is structured, to change. Maybe Europeans and the world haven't seen or heard about any terrorist act that could be or is totally coming from Iran, because Iran had no interest to do so for the last 2 decades. But it doesn't mean it didn't do the same somewhere else, where Europeans didn't see it or didn't notice it.
Such as?
It's not Iran directly, but remember what happened in Lebanon? All the politicians that were killed on the Lebanese soil, and where Hezbollah, which is a big ally, or even called as the Iran's eye inside of Lebanon, carried out by supposedly the Hezbollah. This is what the special tribunal on Lebanon is accusing them of. You know, it was in 2005, 2006, 2007. Women were almost killed. Journalists, the ex-prime minister of Lebanon, journalists, activists, MPs. So, you know, it's not like Iran can change that easily. I mean, it's not that it has been good for like 2 decades and then all of a sudden it's going back to the good old days. It's just that it didn't do anything in Europe for that time, but it was active somewhere else.
I agree with you, but I think it's a little bit more complicated. But at the end, I agree with you that some part in Iran power structure, hardliners, each time that they think their interests are at risk, they turn to violence, internally or abroad.
I was going to ask you, because Julian Borger are talking about a regime on the defensive lashing out. Is that the case, or is it a battle between the hardliners and the moderates, and the hardliners trying to make the more pragmatic or moderates look bad?
I think that's the both. They want, if we consider the last case that we are talking about now, they didn't want just to make a point to France. They wanted as well to make a point to their political rival, to the government, Rouhani's centrist government. Just some days before he goes to Europe. We call IRGC in Iran the government in the shadow. They have weapons, they have money, they have ideology, they have everything you need to run a country in the Middle East.
Definitely, but I agree on the point that it's 2 states inside of 1 state, and the other one, I mean,
so is Rouhani losing his power? Is Rouhani losing his power?
It's not about that. It's just that you have a shadow state, which is the Guardians, with their own, army, active in Iran, in Yemen, in Iraq, anywhere they need to be. Hezbollah recognized they were active in Bosnia.
So who's more powerful today in Iran? Is it Hassan Rouhani?
It's definitely the
or is
shadow
it, for instance,
state. It is Qasem Soleimani.
Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds force.
Definitely the head of the force Quds. But what I'm trying to say, I don't agree that they are fighting against each other. It's just that they see things differently. I mean, you have the regular official state who's trying to do better, and you have the shadow government, the shadow army, but the strongest one, which is under the direct order of Ali Khamenei, which is the guide of the revolution, and who, when they think that the country's interests are in danger, they see nothing. They go to violence directly, even if that means going against the supreme interest of the diplomatic interest of the country.
So, Julian Borger, which is it? Just a communications problem, if you will, between the armed branches in Tehran and the civilian branches, or are these rivals at each other's throats?
Well, there's a rivalry within the system. There are different schools of thought about how to treat the West, how to treat the outside world, and the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, is to some extent an umpire between these different schools of thought that are institutionalized in the Quds force and then in Rouhani's government, and there is constant friction. And Rouhani is obviously weakened by what's happened JCPOA. He stands and falls with the JCPOA. Khamenei has given a certain amount of time to see if anything can be salvaged in terms of benefits for Iran from the JCPOA. And so we are in a very delicate time now where the European powers, China, Russia, are trying to reassure Rouhani that something can be saved and that there is still value of staying within it. But of course, if and when that argument is lost, and if those arguing for the Iran to walk out of the JCPOA because it's no longer receiving benefit, if they gain the upper hand and Iran starts infringing on the terms of the agreement, then we are in a different situation. And it is possible that these attacks are meant to create friction with the Europeans and hasten that Iranian departure from JCPOA.
Yeah, let's listen to what the foreign minister had to say Tuesday in New York. He was singling out the European Union, well, for praise, qualified praise, over the mechanism it announced last week at the UN to facilitate payments for Iranian imports and exports, including oil, so as to avoid payment in US dollars and those sanctions imposed by Washington.
I think what the EU is doing in terms of creating a special purpose vehicle to allow transactions is not out of their love for Iran, but because they believe that if they allow this to happen, then whatever we know of international diplomacy would be buried.
So there you have that kind of argument, and there was a big boost for Tehran, at least a symbolic one, coming this Wednesday with the International Court of Justice ruling with Iran against the United States when it comes to the fact that the U.S. walked away from that 2015 nuclear deal and slapped those sanctions. Is that approach, though, a winning one, though, for...
If we look at from the another angle, Zarif's angle, in a diplomatic way, when he talks, and they know if this nuclear deal dies, what will happen in Iran? The same that what happened in some years ago. The hardliners got the power, and that's not what European countries want. If people in Iran, as we see, are getting disappointed from this centrist government of Rouhani, the only alternative through the structure of power in Iran are the hardliners, Raisi, or other hardliners. That's the maybe nightmare of the European country. That's a diplomatic way that Zarif is talking to European countries. If you don't help, we survive. We will think together.
Julie Berg, what were your thoughts when you saw last week Macron sit down with Rouhani? The French have not named an ambassador to Tehran. We now know why, up to now, that they haven't named a new one. The friction is there, and yet in public at the UN, Macron defending that 2015 nuclear deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for the French and for all the Europeans, the point of the JCPOA is to make sure that whatever frictions, whatever conflict there is in the Middle East, a rivalry in the Middle East with Iran, that it doesn't turn nuclear. That is the sole primary aim of the JCPOA for the French and the Europeans, and that interest remains constant. And so they are keen, in a way, to show that they will push back against Iran for incidents like this, push back against Iran when it comes to Syria, but make it plain that that is a very separate deal from the JCPOA because they see the nuclear part of this as being separate and apart and a priority for them to make sure that weapons of mass destruction don't start proliferating around the Gulf.
Yeah, and on that score, let's listen to the French defense minister. While all this was going on Tuesday with the pre-dawn raids near Dunkirk, the U.S. Defense Secretary happened to be in Paris. Jim Mattis's French counterpart, restating, as Julian was mentioning, Paris's commitment to the nuclear accord and a firm stance on all other matters.
Like President Trump, we consider that Iran's ballistic activity is a threat. Like President Trump, we consider that the influence of Iran in the whole region is a subject of major concern. And so we think those matters should be discussed with Iran. But that must be done with Iran and still respecting the Vienna nuclear deal.
Du traité et de l'accord de Vienne.
The viewer can get a little lost following this story, can't they, Sophia Marat? So the French applying pressure, hawkish on some points, but all for that 2015 nuclear deal.
Definitely. Imagine how the position is totally difficult for Paris, because they know, or they are defending more than anybody else, this strategy, saying if we don't protect the nuclear deal, we're going to have to deal with the Falcons in Iran, and we don't want this. Don't forget that Iran is facing actually a major economical crisis inside the country. I've been talking with people inside. They lack everything. They're in need of anything, everything. So they don't want this. At the same time, France cannot decently act as if nothing happened, knowing or discovering that there was a main plot that was going on with the green light from Tehran.
And so what are your thoughts on the cross-border cooperation we've seen in this investigation? It's Belgium that's shepherding the investigation.
Yes, I know. But at the end of the day, it's European. We cannot have any doubt about the result. It's going to give I think that if France have been freezing these assets, it means that France has definitely proves about the involvement of these people in the plot. So, that's clear enough.
I just want to mention another thing that's is very difficult for France between Iran and the U.S. in this nuclear deal that make it hard for Paris is the ballistic missiles of Tehran, because in one part Paris wants to save the JCPOA, and in the other side is pushing Iran for reducing its number or testing ballistic missiles. That is a red line, and that's an important point, that it's not only red line for the hardliners in Iran. For many part and lots of political figures, political activists, many people even in Iran defending themselves, ballistic missiles is a symbol of this defense, is a red line, and it makes hard to Paris to play between these very sensitive issues for Washington and Tehran. And I think it's an impossible mission that the France government wants to do.
Yeah, but definitely. Iranians don't want to hear about that. Should they be, the hardliners or even the moderates? Yep. And even the people who are suffering from the sanctions against them, they do not want to hear about touching to the ballistics. And they're going to keep on trying and doing their essays, because to them is a matter of sovereignty and self-defense. I don't know who could attack Iran, but this is what they say. For them, it's a matter of sovereignty, and they would not change a bit of it, despite the fact that, of course, everybody's worried about that.
Maybe even they give up Syria, maybe they give up Yemen, maybe they give up Afghanistan, but I don't think Iran would give up ballistic missiles.
Definitely.
Julian Borger?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think for Iran, there are elements that unite the country in terms of this sense of national sovereignty. And so, to some extent, the pressure is going to unite Iran in terms of its resistance. But the pressure is also, and the government mismanagement of economics, finances, is.
Yeah, I was going to say, because we saw those demonstrations that started last December, people saying on the streets, I forget the exact wording, but effectively, enough with Syria and other places. We want to improve our lot domestically.
Yeah, I think there's a growing popular perception that all Iran's woes aren't solely due to sanctions, that there's an element of mismanagement, there's an element of diversion of funds to foreign adventures. And so this is a serious, an increasingly serious political problem for the government, for the overall regime, because the public is no longer buying the argument that all the country's problems are the result of imperialist conspiracies and Western animosity.
Yeah, let's add to this that remember in 79 when the Islamic Revolution started in Iran, when the new country was born, the first thing they did was to put down the Israeli flag in Tehran and replace it by the Palestinian flag. During this protest in last December, you were talking about what was said by the protesters. Of course, they said, let's stop adventure outside the country. For the first time ever, we heard Marbach Palestine, which means in Iranian, in Farsi, death to Palestine. So meaning, it doesn't mean that the Iranians are against the Palestinian people or their struggle. It just means stop selling this story of Palestine and defending Palestine. You're doing nothing for Palestine, and in the meanwhile, you're killing us. You're making us starving.
Julian Berger, I've been meaning to ask you about this group, the People's Mujahideen. They'd been on a terror watch list in the past, yet every year outside of Paris, they hold this big gathering. They draw in, celebrity political figures like Rudy Giuliani and Newt Gingrich, but also politicians from this side of the Atlantic. Tell us about this group.
Well, I mean, ultimately, it remains at its core something of a cult with very tight control over its membership. They have now a base in Albania, and we're hearing reports of what happens to members who try to leave. They are threatened, families are threatened, and so it is not an orthodox opposition group, although it has got itself off the terrorist list in the US. It remains at its core a conspiratorial group.
A conspiratorial group, and yet it seems to have lots of influence and lots of means.
It has lots of money as well, and a lot of the...
Where does that money come from?
Turned up. Well, that is not 100% being pinned down, but the suspicions are that it has support from Israel, has support from the Gulf monarchies.
We should not forget that even we forget about how much power, how much influence they have. There is something that Iran's government for at least for 13 years, they use them as a scapegoat. They use them as a tag for attacking and suppressing any kind of protest in Iran. When they arrest someone, Iran activist, political activist, and social activist, the first and most dangerous tag that they can receive is that he's a member of MEK. And
MEK, yeah, because the group has several names.
They have several names. MEK, the Mujahideen Khalq Iran is the name Persian, and we don't know how much influence they have, how much fan support they have in Iran. But
what do you make of the fact that all these
government of Iran and they themselves they want to exaggerate what they really are and what they have really in their pockets, because Iranian government is interested to push back any kind of protest with this tag that you are a member of MEK, to suppress any kind of protest.
What do you make of the fact that you see Rudy Giuliani showing up in Paris here for that conference?
Having the Americans there doesn't mean they're good, you know. But because I
how are they able to draw them though?
Yeah, because America is using them as you know, the alternative ticket against the mullahs or the Tehran's power. But I totally agree with you when you say that nobody really knows how powerful they are and how popular they are in Iran, because the new generation in Iran that is protesting against this regime have seen nothing from Maryam Rajawi, which is and from the Mujahidi Khalq for decades. What did they do? What did they achieve? Nothing.
And during the many protests that we got since 2009, I don't recall any kind of slogan in supporting them in
the streets, in Tehran streets, or during the protests anywhere.
All right, so a group that's not legitimate back in Iran, but seems to have a lot of support here. Again, I get back to the original question. Julian Borger, do you think they really were targeted by the Iranian authorities?
So can you repeat the question? It didn't come up.
Do you think that the People's Mujahideen or the MEK would really be targeted by the Iranian authorities in this manner?
Well, it is surprising, most of all because of the location, the venue for the planned attack on French soil at a time when France is the staunch defender of the nuclear deal, but you know, whether the Iranian authorities, the Iranian intelligence, would try and target MEK, I think that's quite likely. I think the Iran will be more and more concerned to the extent that the MEK will be used as a covert tool by the Israelis, by the Gulf monarchies, and possibly by the Trump administration to try and destabilize Iran and use them as a covert force, and that, I think, is what is going to be uppermost in the minds of the IRGC and Iranian intelligence. I think that is their fear, their paranoia.
Julian Borger, World Affairs Editor for The Guardian, many thanks for joining us from Washington. I want to thank Ershad Alijani from France 24's Observers. Sophia Ma'a, your book, Baghdadi, Caliph of Terror. You're saying he's still alive. Where is he?
He's in Syria, or in the borders between Syria and Iraq. He was in Syria like 10 days ago. And read my book.
All right, the investigation is here in it. It's published by Stuck here in France. Thanks for being with us. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.